Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Breakdown with Berckenhoff Season 2, Episode 2, titled The Ridiculous United States Mediocre Presidents. So, it's been a long time since our last podcast that was in February. So, it's been about 4 months since some changed since the previous episode where we started the Breakdown Season 2. So lots of news has happened between now and then, but in particular, today's topics are going to be somewhat more on the recent side of news, as well as things that have happened in between, but are still kind of relevant on the news spectrum today. So we're going to get into those topics real soon. And you may not necessarily remember because it's been forever the new format that we're using, but it's going to have a slight tweak for today's episode because most of what we're going to be covering is the first topic we're going to get to today. So we're going to kind of deep dive on it right away instead of coming back to it later because I think it just fit to the format of today's episode a little better. So we don't necessarily have to get too much into the weeds here before we dive into our topics, but I thought we would first start with an on this day look back into history on June 11th as of today's recording. So the first thing that kind of jumped out was in 1776, Continental Congress creates committee to draft the Declaration of Independence with Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and more. Also, another kind of interesting fact was in 1963, US President JFK says segregation is morally wrong and it is time to act. So those were kind of interesting things in history. And the other thing that kind of popped out that I thought was worth a talk was that in 1993, Jurassic Park, directed by Steven Spielberg, opens and sets box office weekend record of $502 million. Also, American Idol in 2002, created by Simon, with judges Simon Cowell and others, premiered on Fox TV. And I believe American Idol still is happening today, so that is something that kind of jumped out a little bit as well. There are some relatively famous birthdays today, such as Peter Dinklage and others, but and Ben Johnson and things like that. But honestly, not too many people that stood out to me necessarily as far as birthdays go. John Montana, if you're a football fan, and as if you're watching on video, you could see it as well. But I just thought that that was interesting and a good way to kind of start before we dive into some kind of more heavy topics, somewhat for today's episodes. Well, really, the last topic we're covering is heavy. The rest is kind of irrelevant to very relevant, depending on the perspective you have when it comes to politics, because that is kind of where we're starting from right away, is with the politics. So, as I mentioned, the first topic that we're going to be spending most of our time with is something that's kind of very interesting to me and maybe to others who have followed my content for at least a little bit. So, America is significantly two party focused. You have your Republicans and you have your Democrats. In today's election scheme, the 2024 presidential election is very not a lot of people really like it. Is the easiest way to put that into perspective. Like nobody is a hard. Well, I shouldn't say nobody. Nobody. Some people are hardcore supporters of Biden, and you definitely see that on the other side of hardcore Trump supporters. But the average person just living in America today, I would say, isn't necessarily thrilled with either candidate as their choice. And there's also a big push recently, especially on social media, with more uh, people of my age of voters, more to say other demographics, so to speak. There's a large focus of age of these candidates. So we previously have discussed on the breakdown with Berckenhoff several times the idea of if there should be ages in politics, age restrictions, so to speak. Should you only be able to serve this amount of time, or should you be of this age? Because there is a minimum age to be president, which I believe is 35, if I'm not mistaken, but there's not really a maximum age. So theoretically, you could have a 99-year-old or a 100-year-old running to be, the United States president. Most likely that would not happen. Now, just out of curiosity, and something that just brought to mind right now, I'm going to search it real quick. But that is of Ron Paul, because there's a very big push, especially of what we're about to get into as a topic. But there's a big push between, kind of the libertarian-minded conservatives or freedom-minded conservatives, freedom-minded Republicans, whatever you want to call it, people who ultimately view liberty or freedom as a focus, compared to maybe the average Republican who are hardcore supporters of Ron Paul. And he did have a run. I believe he ran for both the Libertarian Party and the Republican Party, if I'm not mistaken. But I know his big push was his running when he was under the Republican Party. But the reason I bring this up is he is 88 years old. And there's a big movement behind Ron Paul, so to speak, or at least the people that I kind of listen to occasionally or hear, here and there in the podcast that I listen to. If he were to run, would there be people who would line up in support, even though he is 88 years old? That's the reason I brought that up, because a big push, and kind of going back to my original point before we get too lost in the woods here, is both of our candidates are old people. You have Trump and you have Joe Biden. Both of these candidates are on the older side when it comes to age. You have Trump's age, who is 76, and then you have Joe Biden's age, who I believe is a little bit older. He is 81. So you have 76-year-old running against an 81-year-old, and for the hypothetical situation, you have an 88-year-old running, well, not running, but could be running in Ron Paul, so to speak. So these are all kind of older people who are at the front of their parties. Now, Trump, you could argue, is very much a candidate that is at the forefront of the Republican Party. So I've brought this up before in a breakdown with Berckenhoff, and I brought this up in conversations with friends or with family when politics does get brought up, was Trump, especially with his first run, wasn't, 100% set on a certain party, in my belief. He found that as running as a Republican candidate would give him his best chance for winning. But he decided to do that and ended up winning as president against Hillary Clinton, which shocked a lot of people, really. At least the mainstream media. It shocked a lot of the mainstream media for sure. And you could say the average American wasn't necessarily as shocked, because they were probably the voters, at least in like southern states, the voters towards Trump's candidacy, kind of the unspoken vote, so to speak, that people weren't sure how many voters there are, because America in general has a pretty low voter turnout compared to other countries. So a lot of those people decided to show up in quotations when compared to, say, previous elections. Now, the reason I kind of bring that up is Trump is at the forefront of the Republican Party now. He's the one kind of coming up with legislation in a lot of ways, and ultimately has the support of the base of the Republican Party. Now, there's definitely going to be certain factions within the party who don't particularly like Trump or Trump's policies, but in general, he's kind of the one speaking for the party. You have your other kind of speaking leaders like Lindsey Graham's kind of very outspoken. Ted Cruz, in a lot of ways, is very outspoken. Ron DeSantis, even though he lost in the election primaries by a lot, he's still very outspoken and kind of represents the base. You have Margie Taylor Greene kind of being outspoken, but largely Trump is kind of the guy that everybody looks to in a lot of ways. Now, Joe Biden, is he the one kind of at the forefront of Democratic policies? I don't really see that as much. I don't really see him being kind of the full-fledged leader for what Democrats really believe. In a large way, I think that's kind of gone more towards like AOC or Pelosi in some ways. The senators and congressmen are kind of more of the spoken people than compared to Joe Biden, despite him being the president. Because I think even the Democratic voters and constituents, or whatever you want to call them, are somewhat concerned about Biden's capabilities. They would much rather have Biden in his policies he does stand for, because he is Democratic, in a big way. He does represent the party more than, say, Trump represents the Democratic Party, obviously. So they would much rather have a Biden than have a Trump, but he isn't necessarily the full-fledged leader of the party, I would say. So anyway, it's kind of interesting as the politics and as this is heating up, and it kind of goes right into kind of my first part that I wanted to cover. That's a little bit niche, but something that's of lots of interest for me, and that is with third parties. So third parties in America are not set up to win by any means. You have to have a certain amount of percentage to even be able to debate. You have to reach a certain amount of percentages, certain states to be even on the ballot, and other topics that come up that really make it hard for a third party to truly be successful. And then you just have the idea of a third party vote being a wasted vote. And even you have a lot of third parties that kind of truly take in the perspective of being the upset vote. There's a different word that I'm trying to think about, but it's not coming to mind right now. But being the vote of protest, that's what I was thinking of, the protest vote. So I don't like you, and I don't like you because A, B, and C, and I don't like you because of A, B, C, and D. But overall, you're voting for this candidate knowing 100% sure, like, you put your life savings, your future money, your granddaughter's money, everybody's money, your whole entire family line's money on the line, because you know with certainty that that candidate is not going to win the election. Like, that's how sure you are, but you're just doing it because you dislike those other candidates that much. And so, in a large way, and we're going to get to this a little bit later with one of our topics, but I'll bring it up now in our introduction here, is I think in a large way, Trump believes that the libertarian vote, so to speak, like the hardcore libertarian people, the people that, show up to their state affiliates, to show up to meetings, are very passionate and very people that follow the news and follow what's going on with events. The hardcore people didn't vote for Trump, and that ultimately, in his opinion, costed him the election. And I don't necessarily think that Trump is necessarily wrong. It at least could have made the election a lot closer. So that is kind of an interesting theory that I think Trump has, and ultimately led to Trump showing up at a certain topic that we're about to get to, and I'm foreshadowing just a little bit. And some of you may know the topic already. But yeah, so it's just interesting, the perspective of how this election is going to play out, because you also have another person going into the election. Well, we really have three more people going into the election that are going to be on ballots on certain states, if not all states. With Robert F. Kennedy Jr., you have Jill Stein for the Green Party, and then you have somebody running for a different party. I'm forgetting his name at the moment, or which party he exactly is for, but he's more kind of the socialist leaning party, but it's not the socialist party. But anyway, you have him who's going to take some votes as well. Take a quick drink break. All right, so let's get into the first topic before we just keep measuring or talking about things that get too much into the weeds, because we do have a lot to cover for our actual topics pulled up here. So let me go ahead and share the screen, and this is where I'll also mention that if you are wanting to look at the articles that I do read from or kind of cover, you can definitely tune in to any of the videos, such as the Twitch channel that I live stream it from, or you can tune on to YouTube when this is published as a video. But either way, that is one way to view it. And the links are going to be in the description of wherever you're watching it from as well. So if there's a certain article that you wanted to read in full or look at yourselves in your spare time, you can do so as well. So first topic we're going to get to is the Libertarian National Convention just happened. So this is just the site that was published for the convention. Now the convention's already happened, so a lot of this information is old, but I thought we would start it here just so you could kind of see what was happening. Because the Libertarian Convention has a lot of things happen, not just, one or two things. First thing that happens is getting everybody settled down. Then you have to elect your chair of the party. You have to elect your president for the party. You have to elect your committee members, such as your vice chair, your treasurer, your secretary, and then what they call the LNC. Those are the people who are on your National Libertarian Committee. And those are the people that ultimately vote and make decisions. And then you have your different committees as well that have to get filled and blah, 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 all the real technical stuff. But there were several things that got brought up that made this Libertarian National Convention kind of more heated than previous years. And we're going to get to that here soon. But first thing I wanted to mention was some of the speakers that they were having at the event. So you have Gabriel Shipton, who is Julian Assange's brother and kind of the leader of a campaign to get Julian Assange pardoned. You have Dave Smith. Anybody who is familiar with the Libertarian Party vaguely probably knows of Dave Smith, as well as Spike Cohen. Both of these people are very vocal leaders in the libertarian movement. So Dave Smith is a comedian, so he has a comedian podcast, and he does tour as a comedian as well. But he also has a podcast called Part of the Problem. And Spike Cohen is also just a very big leader within the movement. And then you have a couple of other members like Dr. Mark Shukin, I believe is how you say that, Dr. Peter McCall, and Robert Breedlove of being somebody kind of more in the Bitcoin space. And the other guy was an economist and things like that. So that was rather interesting. And as I was mentioning, is there was a couple of more controversial things that happened that made the convention a little bit more informative, so to speak. But at first, we're going to stay on the Libertarian Convention perspective as far as the political party, because those that do identify themselves as libertarians, these are the people that ultimately are going to be your vocal leaders about what it means to be a libertarian. Oops, pressed the wrong thing on here. Give me 1 second so I can pull up this article. So the first thing is the chair. So the chair in this case remains with Angela McArdle. So Angela McArdle is the previous chair and now gets elected for 2 more years for the party. So let's just read a little bit from her site directly of how she identifies herself. Angela McArdle currently serves as chair of the Libertarian National Party, serves as co-organizer of Florida Rage Against the Machine, and is two-time candidate for California's 34th Congressional District. Angela was a key organizer for Los Angeles 2021 incentive to overturn the Los Angeles vaccine mandate. Angela believes strongly in the sanctity of personal choice and allowing people to govern their own lives. Angela's professional background includes 14 years of litigation practice as a paralegal in organizational leadership with nonprofit organizations. She received her bachelor's degree from Biola University and a paralegal certificate from UCLA. And then she's got a link to cover what she's been working on in the LNC. And she also shows a graph of growth within monthly new members so far. So kind of showing that she has been effective as a chair is kind of the idea here. So I'll mention this and then we're going to get to it a little bit later because, as I mentioned, we're going to stay on what happened in particular in the convention and then we're going to step outside of it just a little bit. And the part that we're going to discuss of stepping outside was Angela McArdle did somewhat of a controversial decision in inviting President Trump and RFK Jr., Vivek Ramaswamy, and Joe Biden. Now, Joe Biden rejected the invite, but all of the three that I previously mentioned accepted the invite and spoke at the Libertarian National Convention. And that is something that has never happened before. It is a very bold strategy or bold decision to make. So think of it in this way. Conventions, I should start here. Conventions are where, as a party, you get to vote on certain aspects. Sometimes it's with bylaws. Other times it's with candidates who are going to be representing you under your party name, right? So this is the big boy convention because you're nominating a president and vice president at this convention. So the same time that you're nominating your own candidate, you're also inviting the in a lot of people's perspective, the guy that's going to end up winning with Donald Trump, and then you're inviting RFK Jr., who could act as the spoiler candidate and the candidate that's more than likely going to end up getting more votes than your own candidate that you're electing under your party's name of Libertarian. It's a very bold idea, and it's something that's never happened before. So, if you were a big person in the Republican Party, it would be very odd if you were to invite, say, I don't think you would because there would be no point for it to invite somebody from the Libertarian Party to speak at your convention because it would only help the Libertarian Party grow because the Libertarian Party is smaller. So, really, the only light comparison would be inviting somebody from the Democratic Party to speak in your convention, but that makes even less sense, right? Now, from a third party's perspective, it's a little bit different because we are so much lower. The Libertarian Party, we're all so much lower than these other two parties. So the pros of this strategy was to get more eyeballs and more attention from mass media as well as from independent media such as Joe Rogan, Tim Pool, Timcast, which is the Tim Pool also, uh, Lex Freeman, or people like that who are more kind of bigger podcasts within the independent media sphere to cover the information that is happening at your convention. You're getting eyeballs to it. But are the eyeballs coming from people that are ultimately going to decide to change their vote? Or is it going to be more negative by potentially causing members who really dislike the decision to leave because your party is already small? You want to be able to grow a third party. You don't want to do anything to make your already small party become smaller. So the idea ultimately becomes, would you have heard of the Libertarian National Convention if Trump or RFK Jr. were not invited? Most likely you would not, unless you're very much invested in the party's perspective, or you're a third party fan, or you're a libertarian yourself, right? So most people are not that because, the party doesn't get a lot of votes each year. So it's a very interesting and dynamic strategy that some people within the party were extremely excited about, but other people in the party were extremely upset by because it didn't make much sense to them. So that's kind of the thing we're going to get to a little bit later and kind of cover a little bit more detail when we talk about each of those candidates speaking by themselves. But I just wanted to mention here and kind of wonder y'all's thoughts, whoever's watching this now or listening to this later. What's your perspective as far as doing that as a strategy? Because most likely, as I just mentioned, you would have not have heard of the party without the extra national attention that got brought on. But then you have to wonder, was this extra attention for the better or was this extra attention for the worse? So that is something that is kind of curious about. So let's get into our next topic here, and that is one of the big things that happened internally for the Libertarian Party, and that was the election of their candidate. So this is big because regardless of what you think of their parties in general, or more importantly, what you think of the election cycle in general, this is a very odd election to vote for, because you could be one of those hardcore Trump supporters, are so anti-Trump that you're a hardcore Biden supporter. But really, I think that's a rather limited number of people. So the average person that is showing up to vote is ultimately most likely making a vote of who they think is going to serve the country better, but not necessarily somebody they really trust or really like. So, as a third party, it's kind of prime territory to run somebody and maybe get more of a percentage of the vote than in previous election years, because these people aren't really truly liked a lot. You do have your hardcores, but the average American isn't just a true diehard of either of these candidates. So, in that perspective, you could say that it is kind of ideal scenario for the Libertarian Party. So, the Libertarian Party was running several candidates as far as who was ultimately going to win and represent the Libertarians. So, there was a lot of people that ended up deciding to run for the Libertarian Party. You had Mike Tarmat, you had Chase Oliver, you had Michael Rectenwall, you had Joshua Smith, you had there was a couple of kind of late people to it, but there was like 8 people that were running pretty far into the party and were taking it more serious. The big people was Michael Rectenwall, Chase Oliver, Mike Tarmat, and Lars Mapstead. Those were kind of the big people. And Lars Mapstead, I think I did a video on him a long time ago, but he's a candidate that has quite a bit of money behind his name. So he was taking his effort of running pretty serious and spending quite a bit on Facebook ads. So if you were in any of kind of the one party, excuse me, if you were in any of like the one party sphere of Facebook, you were definitely seeing Lars Mapstead ads, because he was very, very focused and spent quite a bit of money in doing so. But the way the Libertarian Party works is you run and turn in ballots, and each state has a certain number of delegates to pick each of the candidates. And this is a little bit insider baseball, so we're not going to spend too much time into the minor aspects of how the Libertarian Convention works, but we'll kind of stream run it a little bit or explain it in a faster way. So each of these delegates turn in their ballots, and it goes over and over and over until a candidate is picked at a majority vote. Okay. So it has to be over that 50%, or that 51% is ideally what they're trying to reach, if not greater. Now, those that are looking at my screen right now who are watching this live, you're able to see the candidate who won. But this candidate who won wasn't picked till the 6th ballot, right? So first ballot happened, second ballot, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. It was at the 6th ballot where this happened. And that is incredibly long time of ballots, because each ballot has to be the results are shown, the paper is given, and you have to write it again. So it's a very tedious and very slow process. So the first ballot, anybody under 5% was eliminated, and then from so on, the candidate with the least amount of votes was eliminated. Okay, so ultimately at that 5th ballot, it was between Chase Oliver, Michael Rectenwall, and Nota. Nota as being none of the above, which is, I think, kind of a distinctly libertarian minded idea. And that ultimately is taking, I don't want this person at all, so I'm going to vote nobody. And if you vote Nota as your president, that means the Libertarian Party is not running anybody as president. So it's a very bold thing to vote for. So that fifth ballot, and I wish the Ballotpedia would show it because I don't remember offhand the percentage, but Michael Rectenwald was very, very close. I believe it was like 47% to Chase Oliver's like 48 or 49. Like no candidate got that full percentage to make it 100% because there were some no-to votes in there. But regardless, he was eliminated. And one kind of drastic thing that happened was one of the candidates that was eliminated the ballot before, and Mike Tarman, also somebody that was taking his campaign very seriously, decided that he was going to endorse Chase Oliver as being his vice president because they agreed. And there was some inner drama there because ultimately Michael Rectenwald, who is somebody who's considered to be Mises Caucus, which is basically like the far right of the party or the right side of the party as far as economics goes, when compared to kind of the left side that's more social based instead of economic based. But either way, anyway, we're getting too much into the weeds there. But basically, he said I was going to endorse you, and decided that he was not going to anymore, and endorsed the other guy, and the other guy ended up winning. So that caused quite the drama. So Chase Oliver ended up winning the Libertarian National President candidate, right? The presidential nominee at 60%, 0.61, and none of the above got 35.59%. So 36% point, so let's just say 37% of the delegates decided that they would rather have nobody than a candidate. That is rather shocking. And we're going to get a little bit as to why that possibly could be with our next couple of articles, as well as understanding a little bit who Chase Oliver is. But one of the big things that come up before we get more into the Chase Oliver topic of what happened was Michael Rectenwald. So, like I said, this podcast is getting very much into the weeds of the Libertarian Party convention. So this may not be for everybody, but it also is a little bit interesting for those that know nothing. So I'm trying to explain it for people who don't really know a lot, and for the people that may know some things, and it not to be too repetitive, but also not spend too much time here. So we'll just briefly mention what happened. Essentially, Michael Rectenwald was the Mises Caucus guy. He's an author and a professor. He was a speaker at Hillsdale and had quite the cozy job at Hillsdale with his speaking arrangement. And he ultimately got fired from Hillsdale when he told like the people there that he was going to run as the run for president as a libertarian, and that caused quite the dramatic thing. So he decides that he's going to represent that Mises Caucus and gets backed by them, and he's a big fan of the Mises Caucus. And as I explained already, basically the Mises Caucus is very, very focused on a particular economic philosophy, or I think that's how you would use that term, as far as how money should be spent or should not be spent, and how we should think about governing ourselves within the idea of being libertarian, meaning less government, the better. And it's ultimately named after Mises, Friedrich Mises, is I believe the name. But he very much backs up a lot of their beliefs. So he got the endorsement from the Mises Caucus and got the help from the guy that kind of set up this big caucus that took over the party. And that's where Angela McArdle comes from. She's also part of the Mises Caucus. So it's a very popular movement within this libertarian sphere. And think of Ron Paul. Like Ron Paul is very Mises focused, if you know like some of his policies when it comes to economics. So that's kind of the best kind of streamlined way to explain it. And definitely doesn't cover all the areas. This is something I can explain a lot more in detail on a future video if that's something y'all would be interested in, but I don't want to necessarily get too much into the weeds because it doesn't particularly matter to this particular topic. So let's get back focused to the main part. So he got the endorsement from the Mises Caucus, and some people didn't particularly like Michael Rectenwall because he wasn't super charismatic. He was relatively good speaker. I mean, he did have a speaking arrangement, but he didn't really get people fired up. So, but he was still the front runner. He still had the big percentages throughout most of the first couple ballots. It was only when those certain candidates started falling off and it got less between candidates that Michael Rectenwall was getting less votes. But one theory out there was that he lost by so short amount of votes. I believe it was 68 votes, if my memory is right, like a very small amount. That one thing he did at the National Libertarian Convention could have costed him his election, and that was him having some gummies. So we're going to read the headline here. Presidential hopeful Michael Rectenwall, I added that part, admits to eating weed gummies before remarks. So this wasn't uncommon for Michael Rectenwall to have, a little bit of a smoke sesh or some gummies before he would go to the debate to just kind of get a little bit more calm because he still had lots of anxiety relating to public speaking, especially when it comes to politics where everything is just so judgmental and they're looking for that slight mistake to kind of pounce on. So that was something that was rather interesting. But the big thing here was he got a dose of gummies from somebody that he didn't realize was such a high dosage necessarily. So he ended up kind of making some Biden moments on stage. And unfortunately, I couldn't find any of the clips on YouTube. I'm sure they exist somewhere on X or on Twitter. But ultimately, he was kind of stumbling on the stage a little bit, and he thought like some speaker was going to come after him, but he was supposed to speak first, so it was just kind of awkward. And then when he did speak, he didn't necessarily say anything horrible, but he did say something that the strategist didn't want him to say, so that it just didn't look good. And so the people that are watching this are those hardcore libertarian people who are delegates, and that could have just costed that slight trust issue to happen. And since there wasn't somebody else that was representing the like Mises side of it, because Mike Tarmac would have been the closest person and he already lost, they decided to vote for Chase, and ultimately that could have costed him those votes or vote for somebody else, and that just made that margin a little less. So just that NOTA vote I was previously talking about. So yeah, that was probably a little bit too insider based, but I just thought it was interesting and that I would cover it with y'all guys here as well. And this is this Newsweek article if you wanted to read a little bit more from what people were saying off of Twitter and for his exact remarks. But that's just the kind of the summary of what happened. So now let's look a little bit at who Chase Oliver is and kind of the movement behind him. So Chase Oliver is very much the left side of the Libertarian Party. He's very focused on the social ends of the Libertarian Party instead of necessarily the economic ends of the Libertarian Party. So those are kind of the two wings of the party, so to speak. So Chase Oliver is very focused on being anti-war, which is something that the right party also agrees with. And the right party is oversimplifying this a little bit. But like I said, we don't want to necessarily spend our entire time just talking insider baseball. But I did think it would be somewhat interesting. I'm probably repeating myself a little bit too much, but it's more just a reminder to myself to stay on track here. So anyway, he's representing anti-war and is very like pro LGBT kind of stance as well. So those are kind of his big two things: anti-war and pro kind of LGBT. One of the big things that he was known for was causing the runoff in Georgia between Warnock and that football player, whoever Herschel Walker, I think was his name, in Georgia when he caused that runoff. and costing those Democratic and Republican parties that extra money. So, immigration is a big topic, as you can see on screen. He believes that immigration is a tragic mess. We must break up the bipartisan perspective, and then he kind of provides his plan to immigration. He also doesn't like the war on drugs. Excuse me. He wants to provide more jobs directly for immigrants, such as having a better immigration system that also leads to potential jobs being there, instead of what's happening now, where they ultimately get to country and then can't work. It may go down worse routes, such as smuggling drugs or human trafficking or some other thing like that. Big thing here is ending war. He is very much against that. And he also wants to change the education to having more school choice and things like that. So we could spend a whole video just talking about Chase's policies directly. We're not going to spend too much time on that because, like I said, we'll probably spend a whole video just on that topic at some point before the actual election. But I wanted to go straight into these articles talking about Chase Oliver more directly and hearing some perspectives from media and from these different writers about who Chase Oliver is and how likely he is to do certain aspects. So, this first article is by BBC, and it is Meet Chase Oliver, the youthful U.S. presidential candidate. Some voters in November may see a less familiar option on their presidential ballot when in polling both this November. Mr. Oliver is this year's presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party, a political party that typically wins around 1% of the national vote, is known for promoting civil liberties and small government. At 38, just 3 years above the constitutional threshold to be a presidential candidate, so it is 35, Mr. Oliver is by far the youngest contender in this year's field. He is also openly gay candidate, which he says he hopes to serve as an example to aspiring LGBT politicians. The former Georgia congressional candidate finds himself as a third-party presidential nominee in an election where voters have a sense of deja vu. Former President Trump has won the Republican Party nomination, and President Joe Biden is fighting for the second term incumbent Democrat, setting the stage for a rematch between the two candidates. So we're going to skip just a little bit to get more into aspects about Oliver himself. He came here to try to court our votes. This is about Trump coming to the convention. He got the exact libertarian reception someone like him deserves, and we're also going to get to that here shortly. Though he also states that this being Chase, the warfare state around the world is one thing that he dislikes. And then the article goes on to talk about RFK Jr. and Trump being at the convention. So just a little bit about Chase Oliver. And then covering a little bit else of the convention here. I'm just looking for this one part. Now we'll go to our next article. So our next article is by Newsweek, and it is an exclusive on Chase Oliver, Trump, and Biden, as well as being the whole genocide things of what's happening with covering that topic about the Gaza and Israel that's been going on. Let me make sure for those who are watching live, y'all can see it. Okay. All right. So, Chase Oliver, why are Trump and Biden the wrong choice? So, we're going to get to this video later. So, let's go straight into the article. The 38-year-old Georgia native is less than half the age of the dominant candidates, as Trump is 77 and Biden is 81. So that's my first point. Does him being a lot younger serve his best interest? I think it does. But once again, I'm not entirely sure how much this is really going to matter because the article just mentioned before, and I was going to cover that here in a little bit as well. the Libertarian Party doesn't particularly get a large percentage. So that is something that is rather interesting. Now let's keep going here. Third party contenders, Robert F. Kennedy is 70, Joe Stein is 74, and Cornel West, that was the name I was forgetting earlier, is 71 years old. So Chase Oliver says as a quote, "It's time for a generation to really rise up," in reference to them turning out to vote. Oliver believes that Americans should have the maximum freedom over their own lives without government interference. In his view, drugs should be decriminalized. People should have bodily autonomy to make their own healthcare decisions in consultation, with their doctors, and the constitutional right to have guns should not be infringed. The Libertarian candidate also wants the U.S. to withdraw from NATO and bring home American troops stationed overseas, while doing away with the military aid to foreign nations that includes Israel, which Oliver says is currently committing a genocide in Gaza. He also hopes to phase out Medicare and Social Security, saying that these programs are not sustainable given the national debt currently stands near $35 trillion. When it comes to both Biden and Trump, he says there are terrible choices for our country. Both of them are authoritarians, both of them grow the government. It's just a matter of different styles. And both of the styles governments lead to future partnership in our country and further division among the population, Oliver said. Speaking to Newsweek via Zoom on Thursday, the Libertarian candidate explained his views on a range of issues. And then they have the transcript of the interview posted below. And we are going to get to that interview in a later clip. So you'll just have to remember that. But it will come up in a later clip. And the next thing is an opinion piece from the New York Post. And this is of a libertarian being somewhat upset about Chase Oliver in the chance that he has to represent the Libertarian Party during an election that could see a higher percentage be going to a certain third party. Now, as I was mentioning at the start of my little introduction here, I'm not entirely sure that this protest vote, so to speak, is going to be going to the Libertarians. So I think that they would need a certain right candidate with the right messaging and a real hard push to really get that protest vote during this year, because you do have somebody that I believe is going to be getting that vote, mostly with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. But let's go ahead and read this opinion piece in the New York Post. We are libertarians who refuse to vote for the party's ridiculous presidential candidate. I am a libertarian, but I'm totally turned off by the party and I'm not alone, especially now that Chase Oliver is its 2024 candidate. Although libertarian ideology has mass appeal, the party is consistently alienated voters with outlandish tactics and out-of-touch nominees, and this election cycle is no exception. There's an ads everywhere on this site. Let's try this again. Since Oliver won the Libertarian primary late last month, the former Georgia state candidate has been going viral for some of his more lefty stances. In resurfaced clips, the 38-year-old has been dragged for publicly advocating for defunding the police until they restore trust with the people, describe drag queen story hours as performance arts, and advocating for open borders and defending gender-affirming care for transgender kids as the status quo. The fundamental libertarian principle is live and let live, and there are certain libertarians who embrace that echoes on the path of the political right and the left. But the party is making a massive error by choosing a hard left-leaning libertarian with values designed to turn off Republicans who might be looking for an alternative in 2024. The entire country is looking for someone different than two old foggies in the same old Union Party. Mark, a 42-year-old libertarian, told the Post. This came to a crushing halt when the party nominated another leftist libertarian in 2024. For Mark, who works in IT in Dallas. Oliver's nomination was the final straw that led him to re-register on the voter rolls as an unaffiliated with any party. So many wasted opportunities in the past 2 decades, I have had it. Indeed, the party has embarrassed itself for cycles on end with candidates that nobody has ever heard of, like no-name Professor Joe Jorgensen in 2020, and nominees who are downright outrageous, like Gary Johnson in 2016. The former New Mexico governor, who peaked at 13% in polling numbers, couldn't name a world leader he admires during the interview, and famously did not know where Aleppo, Syria was during the height of the Syrian refugee crisis. He actually asked the NBC host, "Where is that place?" To Johnson's credit, he was the only candidate in the 2016 Libertarian primary debate stage who replied yes to a question: should someone have to have a government-issued license to drive a car? His rivals answered with hell no, and what's next, requiring a license to make toast in your damn toaster. Most people associate libertarianism with principles like free speech, small government, religious liberty, and gun rights, not the right to get behind the wheel without any qualifications, and so on. There's a Twitter post with, "This is Chase Oliver. He just won the Libertarian presidential nominee," and he has kind of the porcupine logo with the Libertarian Party and the rainbow flag, along with a mask, uh, with the Libertarian logos and so on. So the article goes on to talk about a few more quotes from different people about their perspective on the Libertarian Party as a whole. And this ultimately brings me to my large point of this episode. And we're kind of bouncing around a little bit with the topics here, but trying to have a little bit of an order so that, everything makes sense. But one of my main topics was, who is Chase Oliver ultimately going to help out of the main two nominees? You have Trump and then you have Biden. Who is his votes most likely going to be taken away from? Well, with Chase Oliver, his votes are mostly going to be coming out of Biden's votes, but not necessarily out of Trump's votes by any means. So you have Biden, who's ultimately having votes taken away from him by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He may have some Republicans as well. Robert Kennedy, he's kind of on that borderline a little bit, but ultimately a lot of people that I've been listening to or reading about say that most of his votes are going to be coming from the left side of the aisle. So you have him, you have Jill Stein, who is the Green Party. Nobody voting for Jill Stein is going to be a hardcore conservative, like a hardcore Republican. You could have on the fringe voters. I mean, obviously there's going to be some overlap, but really I think he's going to be taking away mostly from Biden's vote. So that is once again going to be helping Trump a lot more. And a lot of people in the Libertarian Party were really wanting somebody like Michael Rectenwald, who was the right side of the party and was part of this broader movement of the Mises Caucus that does branch across a little bit more outside of the party to be their candidate. And he would have been directly taking votes away from Trump and being that kind of third party that's better than Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in a lot of people's eyes as far as the right side of the economic issues for that party. But anyway, let's get to our next article about Chase here, and this is by The Guardian. I'm going to pull it up on screen for those that are viewing this live, and it states, Libertarians nominate Chase Oliver for president, rejecting Trump and RFK Jr. So once again, the convention did happen, and since Trump did speak, he also got nominated to be on the ballot, and so did RFK Jr., and both of them did lose their elections. Obviously, they weren't going to be elected as part of the broader party. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was considering it for a little bit in his campaign, but ultimately it got rejected pretty early on. But let's go back to this Guardian article to read what it has to say. Oliver, 38, who describes himself as armed and gay, was chosen at the party's convention in Washington, D.C. on Sunday at the end of 7 rounds of voting that lasted 7 hours. Accepting the nomination, he vowed to be the only national candidate, contrasting himself to Trump, Kennedy, and President Joe Biden in a presidential poll, and called for a ceasefire in Israel war with Hamas in Gaza, saying, "In the genocide." All of his victory followed separate pitches to the National Libertarian Convention, staged against the backdrop slogan of "Become Ungovernable" by Trump and Kennedy for the backing of a party that could win a significant enough portion of the popular vote to swing what is expected to be a close election. Trump has been running narrowly ahead of Biden in most nationwide polls, while Kennedy, with the advantage of name recognition, though, being a member of America's most storied political family dynasty, has been constantly running ahead of bound or above 10%, making them a potential spoiler candidate. With the party platform dedicated to individual freedom and small government, members booed and jeered Trump on Saturday when he addressed them in an effort. So they go into taking some quotes from what they said, and we're going to get to those videos here in a little bit, so we're going to skip that part. But he is eliminated in the first round of Sunday's voting after winning just 19 votes, 2% of the total. Trump, who was not an official presidential nominee, won 6 write-in votes. So that was the vote there. And Kennedy also got eliminated pretty early on in the balloting. I believe he got 16 write-ins. So they weren't necessarily serious, but the fact that they were at the convention led to some aspects happening as far as that goes. So now we're going to get to our video. I thought we would just go right ahead into the Trump being at the Libertarian National Convention, which is a rather big deal. And I kind of already brought up some things I thought about it already. So we're just going to get straight into this video. And I thought I would just play the video in whole to start my talking point. And this was kind of the first part of Trump's speech as how he's welcomed to the party. So let's just play this in full. Hopefully that won't be an ad on top of this. And this is from the BBC once again, as far as where this video is.
Oh, don't scrape that in the trash. That's not cool.
Okay, so we got an ad, so we're just gonna let that ad play out. But yeah, so this was something I think I kind of mentioned enough to where you can get an understanding as far as people who did like the idea of Trump going in and the people that didn't like the idea of Trump coming to your own national convention, because it is kind of odd. But from Trump's perspective, and we're going to talk about that here in a little bit, is this a good idea from his perspective? So let's listen to this video in full.
Well, in the last year, I've been indicted by the government on 91 different things. So if I wasn't a libertarian before, I sure as hell am a libertarian now. D. Roy wrote, Donald J. Trump will address the Libertarian Party and its national convention on Saturday. The Libertarian Party should nominate Trump for President of the United States. Whoa. That's nice. That's nice. Maybe you don't want to win. Thank you, D-Roy. Thank you. No, only do that if you want to win. If you want to lose, don't do that. Keep getting your 3% every 4 years.
So I thought that was pretty funny, and that's also why I kind of wanted to play this in full, because as we mentioned from a previous article, most of the time the party gets around 1%, and we have had a few kind of more success with Gary Johnson, even though he had that horrendous moment within the debate, he did have the highest percentage that a presidential candidate has ever got. So anyway, I thought that 30% comment was rather funny, even though Trump ultimately got the number wrong. He had that diss that was just kind of funny. I don't think I need to explain the joke, because then the joke doesn't really become funny, as they say. But the big topic here was, from Trump's perspective, is this a good idea? Well, I'm not necessarily sure you're going to be changing any of the hardcore supporters' minds. Think of it this way. To become a delegate for your state party is a lot of work. You have to show up to meetings within your county. You have to be elected as a delegate within your county. Then you have to be elected by your delegate at your state convention. And that costs a lot of money to be at the convention and to have enough political say to have be part of your delegate. So I don't know the exact number, but let's just say, out of simplicity, a big state like California and Texas may have like 60 something delegates, right? I don't think it's that high. I don't really know right now what the numbers are. But a smaller state, say like Maine or South Dakota or something like that, where the population's a lot smaller, may only have like 12 or something like that. So you're one of 12 people or one of 60 people for the entire state that gets to represent your party at the Libertarian National Convention. So it costs a lot of money to do this. And it was in DC this year, and DC is rather expensive. And you're all staying at this one hotel, so you have to be pretty much at that hotel in order to be where you need to be on time and whatnot. So it costs thousands upon thousands of dollars to represent your party, right? So I don't think you're necessarily changing any of these hardcore people, because these are people that have to show like truly that they believe what they believe in order to be voted by your party to do so. Like, you don't really get too many people who are just kind of show up and then say, "Oh, you're part of now the national delegate." Right? That just isn't really how it works. In like, for a job, for example, you're not just going to show up to a random job and then become the manager after day one. You have to show that you're committed to it and that you believe, the policies of your work or whatever, it needs to be done to get promoted, so to speak. So I don't necessarily think you're changing anyone's mind that is, live at this event, right? Like the guy right here, I don't know if you're able to see him too well for those who are watching live. He's somebody from Texas that I have met in person, actually. And he's extremely involved in the party. And I know for a fact he's definitely not going to be voting for Trump. But, that's anecdotal for just one person necessarily. But long story short, I don't think anybody there in this picture is changing their mind. Now, who this is getting broadcasted to, you ultimately could be changing people's minds, because this did get a lot of attention. And their videos on C-SPAN, and it's on YouTube all over the place. This video is everywhere, right? About what Trump had to say. So I think Trump is going to get more votes out of him speaking at this Libertarian National Convention than he is by not speaking at the National Convention, right? Because anybody who already doesn't like Trump isn't going to be voting for Trump. So there could be one or two people, although they spent all of this money, who are at the National Convention, could say, "I really don't want to vote for Chase because he's, the left side of the party, and I'm a Mises Caucus guy, and I just can't get myself to vote for somebody who is still wearing masks or supports, this, when I really don't support this. So I think, and I really don't want to have Biden win again. So I'm just going to close my eyes and vote Trump." Like, that is possible. But long story short, I think he's taking more out of it than what's getting taken away. Now, from a media perspective, the media covered Trump's getting booed at the National Convention quite a lot. So a lot of people were somewhat upset for the libertarians who more are on Trump's side of the aisle, such as I saw this video, and I'm forgetting the guy's name. It just popped up on my recommended, and I was like, let me just see, what he had to say. But ultimately, I haven't really watched any of his content. That was the first time he's popped up on my recommended on YouTube, because I was searching a whole bunch of stuff about the Libertarian Convention, and he popped up around it. But to me, he seemed very much a person who was going to vote for Trump, not like a full-fledged MAGA supporter necessarily, but just somebody who ultimately is going to vote for Trump, or at least likes Trump in some aspects. And he was saying that he was upset that the libertarians were booing Trump because they ultimately invited him. So it's just very rude. But that's just kind of another perspective I wanted to kind of briefly mention here. But ultimately, you had to know that that was coming. So from a campaign perspective and from the Libertarian Party perspective, you're giving the liberal media, the mass media, right, a topic to cover, right? So some even libertarian members who, once again, are more kind of on the Mises side of the aisle, were upset also because this could be a great opportunity to get Trump to come away with one of your policies. This is what Angela McArdle was talking about on a podcast called Part of the Problem with Michael Malice, and also what Dave Smith on his podcast, Part of the Problem, has mentioned as well in a couple of his episodes. With that, if you give Trump a good perspective on some things, or at least where he feels somewhat welcome, you may be able to convince him to do something for you later on. And one of those big things was the idea of freeing Ross Perot, or freeing Julian Assange, or loosening up on drugs, or something like that, right? Something that most hardcore libertarians really believe in, right? So it's kind of an interesting perspective that some people are even upset about that. But regardless of what perspective you take, him being booed is giving the media exactly what they want off of Trump. Like, ultimately, if you want Joe Biden to win, right, you want to show Trump at his worst moments. And him getting booed is potentially one of his worst moments, compared to him having a rally in New York, who we had just before the convention, where he had bunches of people show up. So you're not really going to want to show that. And it gives, Joe Biden potential for, in one of his campaign videos, to show Trump getting booed at an event that he was invited to, and so on. Anyway, let's get into what this Reuters article was saying. Presidential candidate Donald Trump was booed and heckled by many in a let's read that again. Presidential candidate Donald Trump was booed and heckled by many in a crazy audience at the Libertarian National Convention on Saturday night. A marked change from the attention he usually receives from his loyal supporters. Libertarians who believe in limited government and individual freedom blamed Trump, a Republican, for rushing through the creation of COVID-19 vaccine when he was president, and for not doing more to stop a public health restrictions of an unvaccinated during the pandemic. When Trump took to the stage in Washington, there were loud boos and jeers. A smaller section of the crowd, Trump supporters, cheered him. Shortly before he appeared, one Libertarian Party member, Donald Trump should have taken a bullet. Trump's campaign did not immediately respond to a request for comment after the hostile reception. Libertarians generated 1.2% of the national vote in 2020, or about 1.8 million votes. The November's election could be decided by just tens of thousands of votes in a handful of battleground states. So Trump is seeking to peel away some libertarian support. Independent candidate Robert F. Kennedy also spoke. We're going to get to that here shortly. Libertarian Party Chair Angela McArdle ruled Sunday that Trump was not qualified to be the party's nominee for president because he did not submit nominating papers. And then he states here, the reason I didn't file for Libertarian nomination, which I would have absolutely gotten if I wanted it, as everyone could tell by the enthusiasm of the crowd last night, was the fact that as a Republican nominee, and I'm not allowed to have a nominee of another party, Trump said on Truth Social about his post there. And then it goes on to talk a little bit about some things relating to Trump, as Trump then states that he is a libertarian, especially after the 88 or so on felony charges presented against Trump. So Trump could arguably be more anti-government than he was previously. And it goes on to quote a few more quotes from Trump within his speech and talk a little bit about that. But we're just going to move on to our next article that once again was by CNN. And just another clip if you want to see a more extended version that's for reference. We're not going to play that video because once again, it's just the same clip that we have previously watched already. Now, we don't necessarily have the video up because frankly, I didn't think it was really that important to hear directly, but there were moments where Trump did get cheered on at the Libertarian National Convention, especially when he did state that he would free Ross Perot if he were to get Libertarian votes, right? So that is rather interesting. So we did definitely have moments where a lot of Libertarians did cheer him on. But the big thing is with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So we're going to get on to talking about him just a little bit. So Robert F. Kennedy Jr. also spoke at the Libertarian National Convention. So let me go ahead and share screen so that you can see the CNN article that talks about RFK Jr. losing in the first round of the Libertarian Party. Now, as I previously mentioned, there was a push kind of early in the presidential campaign season by RFK Jr. to get on to the Libertarian Party. And it was a very big push and very big possibility of happening for a while. So one of the big political viewpoints of the Libertarian Party is being anti-war. And a lot of people in the Libertarian Party, if not the majority amount of people in the Libertarian Party, see Israel as an aggressor. Not that they didn't get aggressed on, but they're remaining to be an aggressor. Meaning that when RFK Jr. backed Israel, he lost a lot of support for becoming the potential Libertarian candidate. Before he stated his opinion more publicly, there was a lot of support for him to be libertarian because a lot of his anti-COVID or anti-government, anti-letter agencies like FBI and CIA and anti-corporations and all this was very libertarian minded or liberating minded. But once he kind of made that major stance, he lost a lot of support. So once again, referencing Dave Smith, because he is a very popular figure within this movement. In one of his podcast episodes, when he was talking about RFK Jr., which he had appear multiple times on his podcast, was that if he did back Gaza, or at least Palestine in some ways, and not be full support of Israel as he is, he might have the chance to become president because he would get a lot of that rejected Democrat vote because Joe Biden has endorsed Israel in a lot of ways. So he would get a lot of that Democratic vote who doesn't want to endorse Israel or doesn't view Israel in the right way, or the Palestinians who are Democrats. He would get their votes as well. And then along with getting votes from other people, he could ride that movement and ride that wave up to potentially reach an even higher percentage or win the nomination as a whole. So anyway, I wanted to mention that because it was rather interesting from that perspective of things that he was once very close to getting the nomination and then ended up resulting in not getting the nomination. So let's read what CNN has to say here. Independent presidential candidate Robert Kennedy Jr. was eliminated from contention for the Libertarian Party presidential nomination during the party's convention Sunday. In a surprise move earlier Sunday, and this was in May 24th, Kennedy was put up for consideration as a nominee to represent the party, blah, blah, blah. Kennedy spoke in the convention on Friday and was nominated by delegates Sunday on the convention floor, where his candidacy was met with boos from other delegates. Donald Trump was also nominated on the convention floor Sunday, but the Libertarian Party chair ruled it as he did not qualify. Trump received 6 delegates, blah, 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 blah. After Kennedy's elimination, he urged Libertarians to back his campaign, even though we may not agree on every downstream issue. The Independent hopeful said on a social media post Sunday that addressing the convention was a high point of my campaign. One unexpected honor to wake up Sunday to a groundswell in the Libertarian Party seeking to nominate me. I would have accepted the nomination if offered because independent and third parties need to unite right now to reclaim our country from the corrupt two-party system, Kennedy said. Kennedy told CNN last week that he did not intend to seek the party's nomination at the convention this weekend. Tim O'Brien, a Libertarian delegate from New Jersey, said he felt Kennedy was trying to use the party for his own gain without representing its values. We have had a lot of people come into the party. They will run, they will make a big stink, and then leave. And I guarantee you he may come here if he's not going to be here after the election, O'Brien said. We want people that are willing to stay full force. We are libertarians. We are staying with you guys, he added. He has no need for us. He wants to get ballot access. Kennedy, a one-time Democrat, began courting Libertarian officials even before he left the Democratic presidential primary last fall to run as an independent. He met with McCardle in July and February to discuss their shared beliefs. Libertarian ticket was seen as a possible pathway for Kennedy to circumvent ballot access hurdles and take advantage of the party's access to ballots in dozens of states. Kennedy's running mate Nicole Shanahan told CNN on Sunday that the Libertarian Party was more relevant than ever, and added that there's a great deal of possibility of success of us working together. Silicon Valley attorney and entrepreneur comments marked the first time that she has taken questions from a major news outlet since she's joined Kennedy's campaign in March. An article goes on to talk a little bit more, but we're going to go to our next part. So this article here is by CBS News. If you're looking to read a little bit more, I would definitely check out that CNN article as well as the CBS article to read a little bit more quotes, especially that CNN article. Although I have talked very badly about CNN many of times, I did think that article was really good about pulling quotes from multiple different perspectives and from people on the ground who are these delegates that, once again, I've talked about are likely to vote for any of these external candidates that got invited to the party. So you could wonder what kind of belief, the idea being that if you get them to change one or two of their policies towards something that you are looking for, the better. But anyway, so I'm not going to read this article, but I did think it was interesting to kind of give a little bit more perspectives as well as to why also Robert F. Kennedy Jr. did face some hostile hostile opinions. So it wasn't all in support for Robert F. Kennedy either, although largely he did get a better reception than Trump at the Libertarian night. It does look, hopefully the audio was good. It looked like we got frozen for a little bit. It's a privilege of doing this live. So I thought we would listen just to a little bit of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s speech, the first like 5 minutes or so, and then we'll get to our next topic with being Vivek Ramaswamy also speaking at the Libertarian National Convention and talk a little bit about that.
Can you hear me? I'm very, very, very happy to be here today. I'm going to speak about the United States Constitution and particularly the Bill of Rights. A lot of people don't realize that the articles of the Constitution don't grant citizens any rights or freedoms whatsoever. That was a real problem to some of the founding fathers, particularly to George Mason. Mason wrote a pamphlet during the Constitutional Convention that opposed the new government. And that pamphlet was so convincing that the other framers of the Constitution felt that it was too much of a hazard and that the Constitution was in danger at that point of not being ratified. And that's when James Madison came to the rescue by drafting the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. Originally, Madison felt that the Bill of Rights were unnecessary because it was obvious to him that the government couldn't exert powers that the Constitution had not assigned to it. But as everybody in this hall knows, governments don't like to limit themselves. Instead, they're constantly moving to exert and appropriate new powers. But the Patriots in 1791 vividly remembered the British tyranny, and they knew that every power that a government takes, it will never voluntarily relinquish. And every power a government takes, it will ultimately abuse to the ultimate extent possible. And that's why the delegates to the Constitutional Convention balked at a constitution that only enumerated government powers, but nowhere limited them. And so thanks to George Mason, the Bill of Rights was enshrined in our nation's founding documents. The main articles of the Constitution enumerate what the government can do. The Bill of Rights is the opposite. It enumerates what the government cannot do. It's the Bill of Rights that earned America the reputation as the land of liberty. The problem is the Bill of Rights is only a document. It doesn't have any magical powers to force government officials to respect it. And I'm sorry to say that again and again throughout our history, our leaders have failed to respect it. Again and again, they have cited some pretext to suspend and volunteer and violate our constitutional rights. There's always a reason why right now the rights are an inconvenience that we can't afford. It was the Red Scare in the 1920s. It was Joe McCarthy in the 1950s. It was civil rights protests and the Vietnam War protesters in the 1960s. It was the war on drugs in the 1970s. It was the war on terror after 2001. And most recently, it was the COVID pandemic. Maybe a brainworm ate that part of my memory. I don't recall any part of the United States Constitution where there's not.
All right, we were going to stop it right there. So I just thought that was interesting just to hear him speak just a little bit, especially with Robert F. Kennedy. I find that you have to kind of listen to him for at least a little bit to kind of get used to his voice, even though it sounds kind of crude to say. But then once that kind of happens, he's a lot easier to listen to and at least can be understood a little bit. better, because a lot of what he has to say, I think, is something kind of the average American relates to. Will he end up getting the presidential, nomination overall, becoming the president? Probably not. But I just thought it was interesting. But overall, I think he has the most to gain out of coming to the Libertarian National Convention. He gained the most, I think. But I just thought we would share that. Now, the next thing we were going to discuss is Vivek Ramaswamy. He also got booed and supported at the convention with some things that he has to say. In a large way, I feel that Vivek is very smart when it comes to political strategy. He knows what to say to kind of generally get a libertarian's perspective on things. He had a talk with Clint Russell, who was running to be the vice president of the Libertarian Party. He ended up losing in a very, very close election to Mike Tarmat, but it was extremely close and would have been a very interesting ticket because Clint Russell is very, very, very Mises Caucus, much more Mises Caucus than even like a Michael Rectenwall. Uh, and he has his own podcast called Liberty Lockdown and whatnot. But anyway, it would have made a very interesting topic, and it's also a conversation that was about probably 50 minutes long that he had with Clint that I thought was very, very interesting and very much worth a watch if that's something that makes you of interest. I have two I have two articles that if you want to read a little bit about what he said directly or about opinions of Vivek that you can look at, that will be attached to my links. But I thought we would just go to the video because I don't think we're going to spend too much time on Vivek because really there's not too much to say about him. I think potentially he could be positioning himself to potentially be a vice president to Trump, or at least on Trump's cabinet, but I don't necessarily know, besides that, what exactly he's doing. There's not particularly too much for Vivek to gain, as if he were to decide maybe to run as a libertarian next time around. But I don't really see that happening. I think ultimately he came because he knew Trump was coming, so that he could position himself to potentially be the vice president to Trump. That is my thinking. But we're just going to play this 42-second clip from Forbes about what they viewed as his highlights, as well as him getting booed. Oops, sorry about that. Wrong video for Vivek. It's a weird sound. Hopefully the sound's good on y'all's end. So there kind of mentions one of the motives that potentially Vivek had with coming to the convention, and that is trying to get extra support for the vote of Trump, which once again brings me to my personal belief that he is trying to position himself to be the vice president to Trump. As I mentioned before, and we'll spend a little bit more time because we're about to get to that as a topic. I mentioned this Newsweek slash Forbes interview that Chase had, so we're going to go ahead and listen to that. And once again, Chase is the Libertarian presidential nominee, and it was his perspective on Trump, RFK Jr. Getting invited to the convention. So I kind of answered this question a little bit earlier. Ultimately, I think that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. came in with a better game plan for how he was wanting to address the convention. Trump is very bullish in his approach, and he is a very confident guy, kind of narcissistic in a way. I think we all get those vibes from Trump, and I think it's accurate vibes. So so that kind of goes a long ways towards the respect that Trump was coming in with. I think that Trump and his team obviously saw for good reason. I think Trump believes in all of his heart that he is able to come in and speak at the Libertarian National Convention and change people to vote for him. I think Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is coming in with more of a realistic approach of saying that I understand you, I get you, but think of the chances that we can have if you were to vote for me this time. That's my perspective on it. I just realized I don't think y'all can hear that. I don't think I pressed the share thing. Oh man. Well, that's awkward. That's the privileges of doing this live and having not done this in a little bit. All right. Well, let's just go ahead and I'll share this tab and we'll play this section in full because I already shared my main thought already. So you're gonna think, well, this is a bit strange because we have those moments of silence. Man, that sucks. I thought I was sharing it. Ay. Well, here we go.
I want to talk about something you told me in February, which was that winning the White House is obviously the ultimate goal, but there are some other victories like building momentum and building up the party. Those are also wins. So, what does that specifically look like between now and Election Day?
Yeah, so that looks like traveling across the country to build with the votes that we were hoping to gather that will grant us ballot access in states all over the country, making it easier for libertarian candidates up and down the ballot to run for office, to appear on the ballot. And that can help us with earning major party status in states all over the country. That gives us primary ballot, increased media attention, invitation to debates for our candidates. And so these are the building blocks of a third party that can rise up and challenge. This is also why I say don't invest in RFK, who's going to be a one and done candidate. He runs through November. If he loses, he's gone. If I don't win, we're still building up a mechanism that can grow a foundation for the future. And so I encourage you to November, but in the long-term building of a third-party structure that can challenge Republicans and Democrats for years to come.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was at the Libertarian Convention. He got a better reception than former President Donald Trump did. What are the major differences? Because he's also an independent candidate. So what are the major differences between you and him?
Yeah, well, I think Robert Kennedy got a better reception because he was smart enough to say the things libertarians wanted to hear as part of his platform, the areas of alignment, criticism of the COVID state, Anthony Fauci, et cetera. He talked much about respect for the Bill of Rights, which in general, most of the Bill of Rights. But the areas where we disagree is many of his solutions call for more government intervention. Look at his housing plan, calling to cap interest rates at 3%. This is the kind of stuff that got us into the housing crisis in 2008, was increased government intervention and putting the hand in the housing market. Look at his environmental plans. He wants to increase the government technology in the direction that the government and central planners want to go, as opposed to where the free market wants to go. Whereas I say, get government out of the energy race altogether and let the free market truly act and embrace nuclear power. And then, of course, he supports the actions of the Israeli government. He's backing them 100%, whereas I have empathy for the Gazans. I understand that this needs to stop. We need to see a ceasefire now and immediately. And he is full-throated backing. He's probably the most pro-Israel candidate on the stage between the four of us.
Between now and election day, what does your strategy look like going forward? Do you have a 50-state strategy? Are you focusing on some of those key battleground states? What does that look like?
Well, unlike the two-party system that's only going to focus on a handful of battleground states, if you live in a swing state, congratulations, you're going to get to see Donald Trump and Joe Biden a lot over the next few months. But for me, I'm about running all over the country to spread our message, to build our foundation up. They're going to be completely ignored by Republicans and Democrats. In fact, I've already campaigned across all 50 states, which is something most Republicans and Democrats don't do. And in fact, I'm the first libertarian to ever get that done. And that's to be a symbol, to be indicative of the energy and enthusiasm we want to build up all over the country. So if you're in a swing state, I'm still going to see you. Being ignored by Donald Trump and Joe Biden, come out and see us. Embrace the message of liberty, and I hope to earn your vote.
All right. So that was that video that now you could hear. Once again, I apologize for that. I think we're going to stick to just one theme, and we'll get to kind of the third category I wanted to share, which was about the wars. I think we're going to save that for a future topic, because I think we've been so focused on politics that it wouldn't make much sense to go off into this separate category. So this will kind of be a special episode of our breakdown with Berckenhoff, even though it isn't necessarily like a full-fledged solo episode like I did with the individual libertarian spin the wheels that I've done. This is still, the podcast necessarily, but not on that format that I was previously thinking about doing. Not that it really matters, because it's just the second episode. Isn't like we're 20 episodes deep. And anyway, just getting more insider baseball on what's going on in my mind here. But let's get into the second topic that I was going to cover in our final topic, and that's going to be who is ultimately going to be running for Donald Trump as far as vice president. And then we're going to get a little bit into what the posters are saying about Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and who they think is most likely going to win as the next president. So this article is once again by BBC, and it is who will be Donald Trump's pick for vice president. So the competition to become Donald Trump's vice president candidate is heating up. Trump has teased crowds with lengthy short list. However, if tradition holds, before learning his selection, running mates are often revealed around each party's national convention. The Republican National Convention takes place in mid-July, so we should be hearing it relatively soon. Excuse me. A number of potential vice presidential candidates have received vetting materials, including inquiries about their financial background, according to BBC News partner CBS News. First one on the list, according to BBC, is Tim Scott. Senator Tim Scott, arguably the most prominent black Republican in the country, and was among the competitors Trump defeated in the party's primary contest. So the reason that could be somewhat important is a lot of times in politics, identity politics are played on both sides of the aisle. One of the reasons that Biden's vice president is what it is that he wanted a woman to be his vice president. And then off of that, they picked Kamala Harris, who also is black. So he has a black woman as his VP. And Trump has a great opportunity to get a lot of the black vote coming into this next election, because a lot of the areas who are historically pro-Biden have showed in some recent polls that they're at least more willing to vote for Trump, and having a black vice president could help in the matter of at least feeling like somebody who's very close to Trump, and ultimately the decisions that he will make as somebody that looks like them, right? That kind of goes a lot of ways, even though it may seem kind of artificial to people who really follow politics, or even to just somebody who doesn't really follow it. But anyway, let's go back to what the article says about it. Mr. Scott, 58, pitched his brand of optimistic conservatism in a play for influential evangelical Christian vote in early voting states, but his campaign never caught fire. After struggling to raise money and 3 lackluster debate performances, he exited and quickly endorsed Trump. It was his rousing remarks at Trump's rally before the New Hampshire primary that elevated him as a top contender for vice president. "We need Donald Trump," he said before appearing on stage during his fellow Republicans' victory speech. Next candidate they say here is Doug Bergman, another of Trump's fallen primary opponents. Doug Bergman in his second term as governor of North Dakota. Mr. Bergman made little impact as presidential candidate, but has returned to the campaign trail with his endorsement of Trump. A social conservative and fiscal hawk, he said in 2023 that he would never conduct business with Trump because you are judged by the company you keep. Mr. Bergman began his career with a small software startup, later acquired by Microsoft, and began his years of internship having earned billions. The next one they have is O.C. Stinfanek. I may have said her name wrong. I don't think I've heard of that one before. She is 39 and is a New York congresswoman, and the highest-ranking Republican woman in the U.S. House of Representatives. The once moderate Trump-hesitant Republican has drifted to the right in recent years and is now widely considered one of Trump's most loyal defenders on Capitol Hill. In recent months, she has also risen to modest fame in media circles with her viral takedown of 2 Ivy League college presidents. Then we have Marco Rubio. Trump and Marco Rubio did not get along in the 2016 primary race. Trump called him Little Marco, a reference to his satire, while Mr. Rubio commented about Trump's small hands. Florida Senator has since worked closely with his former rival, endorsing him early on the primary season. J.D. Vance is another one. J.D. Vance is a junior senator from Ohio. He's 39. Has rallied support for Trump on several occasions in recent months. The Yale-educated former venture capitalist, once a self-identified never-Trumper in office, he had the issue to Trump's base, but he believes that Trump's administration in the Senate has not ruled him out because he's become a supporter in recent years. Kristi Noem. Kristi Noem is the governor of South Dakota, once toped a poll taken by mostly Trump diehards on who he should pick as the vice president. Ms. Noem, 52, rose to national prominence with appearance on Fox News, especially when she flouted mask mandates and other restrictions during the pandemic. Her star was very much on the rise until the release of the memoir in 2024, in which she recounted the story of hating and then shooting her 14-month-old dog because it wasn't a good hunting companion. Cricket was untrainable and dangerous, she said. She also shot a goat she thought was nasty and mean. Brian Daniels, 45, Tulsi Gabbard, and some others potential could be Ben Carson, Tom Cotton, Vivek Ramaswamy, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Katie Burke, Carrie Lake, and Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Tulsi Gabbard might be interesting. That was the BBC article. We also have the Center for Politics article that is on the same point here. I think it kind of laid out pretty well the potential candidates, the BBC one, but I did want to include this one as well because it kind of goes into each part a little bit more directly. What advantages does a senator give you compared to somebody who's in the representatives? What advantage does somebody in the House give you? What advantages do governors give you? And so on, compared to the general who should be your VP as far as like by state. Because if you pick somebody who's from a swing state and that is popular within that swing state, you could get votes based off of that. And that could be important. But there's also identity politics that come a little bit into it and several other things. So I thought that article kind of shared some insight for that, for those that want to look a little bit more into it. So now, who is going to win this election? Let's look at some polls, some recent polls that say who might win this presidential election, despite there being potential for a protest vote to come into play. So this is by ABC News. It says that Trump and Biden are tied in 538's new election forecast. Today, 538 published our official forecast for the 2024 presidential election. The model builds on our general election polling averages by asking not just what our best guess is about who is leading the presidential race today, but what range of outcomes are possible for the actual election in November. At least once per day, we will return our simulations of the election with the latest data. So bookmark our interactive and check back often. So 538 became relatively popular for a polling website or election forecast when it elected that Trump had a greater outcome to win the race than all other polling places said they would in the 2016 was the election against Hillary. And they were also, if I believe right, like the first site to say that Trump won the election when compared to other sites. At launch, our forecast shows President Joe Biden logged in a particularly tied race with former President Donald Trump, both in the Electoral College and by national popular vote. Specifically, our model reckons Biden has a 53 in 100 chance of winning the election, meaning he wins in slightly more than half of our model simulations of how the election could unfold. However, Trump still has a 47 in 100 chance, so the election could still very much go either way. The range of realistic electoral outcomes generated by our forecasting model stretches from 132 to 445 electoral votes for Biden. A statement on how much things could change by November and how off the polls could be. Our model is brand new this year with tons of bells and whistles and modern statistical tools that you can read all about in our methodology post. Here I'll give you the non-wonky versions of how our forecasts offer a few tips on how to read it and explain why we think forecasts are valuable in the first place. So it goes on to explain that. And I think I may spend a whole separate solo video about their new forecast model in a separate YouTube video. But I think this 538 is something I'm pretty interested in, to be honest. I think that they generally do a pretty good job with their analysis, and it just gives kind of that interesting insight. I'm not sure how much I really value polls or how much I take into account the information, but it does give you something to talk about. It's something interesting. Now, one other interesting thing I thought I would bring up is this New York Post. So these are opinion articles, largely, not necessarily fully factual analysis or whatnot. But I thought that this topic was rather interesting. Here's the headline. Top pollsters suggest it may be time for Biden to drop out of the 2024 presidential race as approval ratings hit all-time low. So that's what I was mentioning in my introduction part of my analysis or of this podcast. And it is how favorable are people really to Biden? Like Trump obviously has his diehards and his supporters that very much like him and think he's like a god, essentially. But Biden doesn't really have that. He's more just got the vote of people that really dislike Trump or think that Trump is bad for the country. He's got that vote, which does have quite a few people. But let's go ahead and read what this article has to say. Poster Nate Silver warned Monday that President Biden's approval ratings are so low it may be time for him to reconsider seeking a re-election. Biden just hit an all-time low in approval, 37.4%, the data analysis and founder of 538 wrote on X, referencing his organization's latest average of the president's job approval numbers. Dropping out would be a big risk, Silver argued, but there's some threshold below which counting to run is a bigger risk. Are we there yet? I don't know, the polling guru acknowledged, but it's more than fair to ask. And it kind of goes on to talk a little bit about that. But I thought I would briefly pause here just for a second. So if Joe Biden were to drop out of the race, who would step up to become the Democratic presidential nominee? are the one running under the Democratic Party ticket. I think ultimately that would be somebody like Gavin Newsom. But he's not perfect either. But I don't think it's going to be like Kamala Harris either, because in a large way, Kamala Harris is even more disliked than Joe Biden is, especially by her own party. So it's kind of interesting as far as that goes, but it kind of brings you to another thing to consider as well, is if his approval numbers are so low, then how is he still favored in your model to win this election? Like, that doesn't particularly make much sense as far as polls go. It's voting for somebody that clearly has mental struggles, dementia, whatever you want to call it, or voting for somebody who's such a narcissistic cockroach. Those are your options as far as who you're going to pick for president. Hensing why I named the podcast the way I have, The Ridiculous United States Mediocre Presidents, because they're both ridiculous, they're both mediocre, and they're both annoying as all get out. But let's go back to what our article says here. Silver caused a stir in February when he argued that there might be Democrats who are better equipped to take on the 77-year-old former president last month. What's clear, in my opinion, is that Democrats would have been better served if Biden had decided a year ago not to seek a second term, which would have allowed them to have some semblance of primary process and give voters a say among the many popular Democrats across the country, said Monday. Silver noted that Biden is much worse shape in terms of polling than he was in 2020 heading into the election day, when he held leads in the swing states of Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Silver suggested Biden's age may be to blame for his lackluster support. Biden's age is something voters are overwhelmingly consistent about Michigan polls for something they dislike about him. And then it says that Trump is unlikely to drop out, and Trump still has many people who dislike him. And then he quotes on to here that Trump should consider dropping out as well, he noted, but Biden would lose by 7 points if someone else would. Well, hang on a second. Let me read side by side here. Let's see. Where else? Yeah. So it shows that in a lot of those swing states, Trump is ahead in polls. He also says Silver suggests that Biden's age may be to blame. Biden's age is something voters are overwhelmingly consistent about Michigan polls. The side-by-side video comparisons of Biden now versus in 2012 are extremely revealing. I think it's borderline gaslighting to belie just media vibes. Silver noted that in his estimation, Trump should also consider dropping out. Biden would lose by 7 points, the pollster said, of a scenario in which the presumptive Republican nominee is not the party candidate for president. So if somebody else who's still popular within the Republican Party were to run, President Trump or Donald Trump, could, let me restart. If someone else besides Donald Trump, who's still popular within the Republican Party, were to be the one running instead of Trump, he could win by a landslide ultimately, because we have seen tremendous struggle with Joe Biden. So it's kind of interesting. So just hypothetically, who could that person be? Let's just say it's DeSantis. DeSantis definitely has people that dislike him. I even heard at the time when DeSantis was running that he is even more extreme than Donald Trump, which is hard to believe in a lot of ways. But I did remember hearing that too. But let's just say hypothetically it was somebody who's very popular but doesn't have any of the baggage. I don't exactly know what would be forecasted, but I do very much see how that could just be hands down a Republican victory. Although Trump, in all his bad things he is very popular and he is covered by the media all the time. So that does have some advantages as well, just being constantly in the news in a way. Now, this last article is by Newsweek. Joe Biden favored to beat Donald Trump in 538 election forecast. So once again, it talks about that we just read. I just wanted to give a little bit more information and just talk briefly while we're at the end of today's episode how just weird it is that we are in this election cycle we're in now. I don't think Joe Biden or Donald Trump really deserve to be president again for the United States. But those are ultimately the two people you have to choose from. And it is quite depressing that is. And it once again goes back to why I titled it The Ridiculous United States Mediocre Presidents, which the acronym is Trump. Not that I think that Trump necessarily is a great guy or maybe even is going to win. I think he's probably going to win more than Joe Biden at the moment. And not that I'm going to vote for Trump, because more than not, I'm more likely than not that I'm not going to vote for him. But anyway, it's a very sad thing. I was hoping that the Libertarians would produce a better candidate, because I'm not really all liking Chase Oliver by any means. I didn't really particularly care for Michael Rectenwall either. I think he probably would have represent my values maybe a little bit more. There was other candidates out there that I favored more. But I just don't see them getting any sort of popularity. So the protest vote ultimately is going to be Robert F. Kennedy Jr. But I don't see him getting enough percentage to really become the president. And would he be a good president? That's something you can argue for too. I'm not necessarily sure he would. I do think he'd probably be better than Donald Trump and Joe Biden, but I don't necessarily think that he's going to be a great president like somebody else would be. But anyway, it is a very sad thing, and yeah. So I'm not sure when our next podcast is going to be. I'm hoping to at least do once a month. I mentioned that in the last episode, and it just fell apart. But that's the goal, is at least doing it once a month. So that's just something to think about for y'all. So, but we'll talk about what's happening in Russia and Ukraine and Israel and Gaza on our next podcast, because I'm sure that those issues are still going to be continuing, even though it's just such a tragic situation on both fronts. But today's episode is basically a special on the Libertarian and the two candidates of Trump and Biden. As kind of a special little episode here on the Breakdown with Berckenhoff. Hopefully it wasn't too boring for y'all. I try to make it somewhat interesting and not too much in the weeds. But it is something I'm extremely interested in, as I have followed the Libertarian Party for a long time. So it's something of great interest for me. And hopefully you at least learn a little bit, and you're either going to want to look a little bit more into the potential Chase candidacy, or you're just going to be completely against him based off of the little information that I have shared so far. He's definitely not going to gain a lot of support from my typical audience, I would say, from people that have at least followed me for a little bit. He's probably not going to get any votes from them. But I do see him taking away some votes, as I previously mentioned. But anyway, we're just going in circles here a little bit. But I appreciate y'all for stopping by. I probably will make a video at some point about Chase Oliver a little bit more in detail, as well as maybe an RFK Jr. video with a little bit more into detail. But I'm not sure yet when that will be made. Just timelines are very hard to keep at this moment as I'm trying to figure out life and all that fun stuff. But anyway, thank you all for tuning by. Like I said, hopefully this wasn't too tedious or boring for y'all. A little bit different, a little bit of a special, and I appreciate that. And hopefully I'll catch y'all next time on the Breakdown with Berckenhoff with our topics we will cover then. Oh, and one quick thing, just right before I click the end, I will mention the special. If you're big into aviation content, I would definitely check out Mentor Pilot. He has really good videos about recent, airplane crashes or airplane safety or just really interesting stuff about airplanes. So if you're interested in the aviation at all or investigative essay type of content, definitely check them out. I just wanted to mention that real quick. But anyway, thank y'all and see y'all on the next one.